Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Emmanuel, and if this is not your first time in my channel and you haven't subscribed, then maybe just consider clicking the subscribe button. We have a lot to learn, right? So in today's video, we're going to be learning about the MVC design pattern, and this is actually something that many of us have consciously or unconsciously worked with. All right, so what we're going to be doing today is I'm basically going to explain how things are working, just so that the next time you are writing code, you are more deliberate, right? You understand exactly what is happening. Okay, so yeah, let's get to it. So what is MVC? Let's start with M. So M means model, and model you can think of as your data layer. So basically, it gives us the structure of our data. So for example, we have our user model, and the user model has like first name, last name, email, phone number, etc. Right? So that's basically what the model is. Now in Swift or in iOS, we are able to create models using either a struct or a class. So you have like struct and then the model name, then you open your curly braces and then pass in like your attributes and your functions. All right. So the next thing we have is our view, and just like as the name implies, it's basically what we can see on our device. So you run an application, you can see your buttons, you can see your text fields, you can see whatever controls we have on the screen. So that's basically what the view is. And finally, we have the controller. As the name implies again, it's responsible for controlling things that are happening within your app. So basically, it serves as a sort of middleman between the view and your model, right? So a view performs a particular or triggers a particular event. The controller listens to that and then it handles it. Depending on whether or not it needs data from the model, it goes to the model, retrieves that data, and then updates the UI. If it needs to just update the model, then it gets some data from the UI and then goes to the model and updates the model, right? So the controller basically is the one in charge of just making sure that things are connected end to end, all right? So let's actually see the flow in action. So first of all, we have the view, just like we said. So a user performs a particular action, so maybe like a button click or like the user is typing some text in the field. And if, let's say for example, we want to listen to whenever a field text is entered in the text field, we want to change the color of the UI view, for example. So the controller listens to that, listens to the event or the user action, and then checks whether or not the text meets a particular criteria. And if it does, it just goes ahead and updates the view. In our case, updates the background color. All right. Then alternatively, if the user action requires some data from the model, then the controller just goes to the model and updates the model if it needs to update. But if it needs to retrieve, it just gets the data from the model, and then the controller is notified whenever it is done, and then the controller just goes ahead and updates the view. So that's like the general description of the flow throughout the entire MVC design pattern. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is now we're going to go into code, just so that I can show you practically what happens in an MVC system. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to open up XCode and actually have a starter project created, just so that I don't waste much time implementing the design for this explanation. All right, so if you go over, and actually I have a link to this particular project in the description, so if you want to follow along, then just go ahead and pause the video, download the starter project, and you're going to have this exact code that I currently have, and then we can go from there. All right, so basically just to walk through what we currently have. If you open up the main.storyboard, we have two view controllers over here. The first one is a login screen, okay, and the second one is sort of like well, it is a home view controller. And the idea of this is when your login is successful, then it takes you to the successful screen. All right, so that's basically what this application currently does. And if you go over to the login view controller, you can see that nothing is happening here. We have references to the email and password fields. Then we have a reference to our login button clicked. So whenever you click the login button, this particular function is triggered. Then this basically is so that when you click on the body of the view, it resigns the keyboard. All right. Then if you go over to the home view controller, there's nothing happening over here. It's just in boilerplate code. All right. Good. So now in UIKit, we have our view and our controller combined into a single file, which is called the view controller. All right. Now don't be confused about that. Since if you are working with storyboards, for example, you can basically just think of your actual design as your view. So just like we explained, the view is whatever design the user sees. So our buttons, our labels, our text fields. So you can think of this as your actual view. All right. Then you can think of your login view controller as your controller, because this is where all of the logic for how your view is going to be updated, on how data is going to be gotten, is going to be present. All right. So you can think of this file as your controller. It basically controls the flow of your application. All right. Now, if you are building programmatically, then it is very possible for you to basically separate them into individual files. So you can create your view as a view. So I could have something like login view, then I would have another one like login controller. All right. Now in the login view, all I'll be doing over there is to design my buttons. So since I'm not doing like a drag and drop using the storyboard, I'll now go ahead and say something like let email field be equal to UI text field, like this, and just go ahead and style. All right. Then add my constraints and positioning and all those things. So this can be done in your login view. Then in your controller, you can now do the actual logic. All right. So it just depends on how you feel like structuring your code base. But since we're working with storyboards, then we're just going to use it like this. So the login view controller is where our view logic is going to be. And we're going to think of our main.storyboard as our view. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a model. And just like many of us are already aware, if you want to create a model, you just open create a new Swift file, and we're going to create a user model, because what we're trying to simulate is you log in and a user object is created. Okay, so we're going to create a user model, and we're going to make this a struct. So struct user, and we're just going to create a couple of attributes over here. We're going to have first name as string, and let's add last name, email, let me see, age, if I want to do that, as int. Let's just stop over here. But as you know, we can have like a whole lot more. We can have things like address, we can have location, we can have nested models. So an example would be, let's say I wanted to do location. I'd now say struct location like this, and say what lat, if I wanted to do like coordinates or something, then lng. I'm just writing rubbish. So double, and this will be double like this. So location is going to be of type location. All right, so this is a nested model, right? A nested struct, if you will. So yeah, you can do this. Okay, so good. So this is our model. Again, just to go over it again, we have our view and our main.storyboard, our view like this, then we have our controllers, the login view controller, we have our home view controller. Cool. Then we have our model, which is our user model. All right, so what we want to do now is, the first thing we're going to do is we want to listen to changes So let me just go ahead and quickly run this application just so we see what we currently have. Good. Now, if you look at this, you notice that when I click on this login button, or actually it's just enabled. So what we want to do is we don't want this button to be enabled unless there's text in both the email and the password. All right. So we only want this button to be enabled when both of these guys have at least a text, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the login view controller, and what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new function, so private func, and we're going to call this validate fields. All right, and we're going to make this, or before then, let's just hold on. So now we're going to add listeners to both the email and the password fields. So how do we do that? We just say email field.add target, and the target is going to be self, action is going to be hash selector, and self.validate field. Then the control is going to be editing changed. Wonderful. So whenever the value of the text field changes, is going to trigger this function. And we're going to have to add @objc right here to fix this error. Okay? So whenever the value of the email field changes, is going to trigger this function to execute. We're going to do the same thing for the second field, which is the password field. All right? Now what we want to do here is we want to check, we want to set the button to be enabled or not. So we need to create a reference to that button. So just go over to the main.storyboard, and all these things I'm doing here should be quite familiar to you, I'm hoping. So hold down control, click, drag, bring this guy over here. This is going to be the login button. Then we go back here, and here we can say login button dot is enabled to be equal to, so it's going to be enabled if email field dot text is not equal to this, and password field dot text is not equal to this. And guys, this is a very simple and basic validation, so you can of course make it more complex, because you can verify that email is email. All right, so I'm just trying to keep things simple. So this is going to validate the field and update the button to make it either enabled or not. So let's actually just go ahead and run this. And actually, before we do that, we want the default state of the button to be, oops, I don't need this. So we want the default state to be disabled, right? So we're going to click on the button, let's close this, and bring this guy up. So go to the attributes, and of course you can do this by code, but just come over here and click enable, right? And you can see that it actually gave us like a visual representation that it's not clickable. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna run this, and let's see what we currently have. All right, so you can see that it is currently not enabled and we can't click it. So I'm gonna add some text here, and I'm gonna add some text here, and you can see that it automatically just became enabled. So what was happening, if we were to go through the MVC flow again, is while we were typing, right, the view was notifying the controller, right? So while it was notifying the controller was performing some logic, and based on the logic, the controller saw that it needed to update the UI, and it updated the UI automatically. All right, so that's the MVC flow. Now, when we click on the login button, what we want to do is we want this login button to simulate a network request. So we're going to have like a network service that is going to check the values in the email and password fields, and if it is a certain value, we want to go to the login screen, or the logged in screen, the home screen. So how do we do that? Let's just go ahead and create a very quick network service. So we're going to say network service like this, and here we're going to create a class called network service, and we're going to create a static let shared just to make it a singleton. I don't think I've made a video on singleton yet, but I'm sure you guys have already learned. because of the way we use it. But if you like have questions about this, then just let me know and I'm gonna make a video on that. In it. Great. So now we're gonna create a function over here called login, and this is gonna take in two parameters. The first one is the email, and the second is password. All right. Close this, and we're gonna add a completion handler over here, just so that we know that it is, just to simulate that it is logging in. So we're going to say completion, and this is going to be at escaping, and we're going to just pass in bool, just so we know whether or not it is successful, and void. All right. So next, what we're going to say here is dispatch queue.global. So we're going to jump off the main thread, and we're going to execute this code. So we're going to say wait for, like, let's say 2 seconds, and when we're done, we're going to say, did I miss an argument? No. Oh, no, wait, sleep. So sleep for 2 seconds, and when you're done, we're going to jump back to the main thread and say dispatch queue.main.async. And what we're going to do here is we're going to call the completion, and we're going to pass in some value. But before we do that, we're going to do a check. So we're going to say if email is equal to test@test.com and password is equal to password, the most secure password in the world, then we're going to call completion and pass in true. Otherwise, we're going to call them completion and pass in false. Then at the same time, we're going to have a private, and this is basically going to simulate, I wonder what I'm typing. So this is basically going to simulate like our local storage. All right. So rather than making network requests, we want to just create a user when we log in. So this is going to be user, and this user is going to be our model, right? So we have a user model, which is going to be what this user is. And it's optional because, you know, if you're not logged in, then it should be nil. All right. So now that the login was successful, what we're going to do here is we're just going to say user should be equal to user, and we're going to have to pass in all of these values. So first name is going to be Emmanuel, last name Aquara, email test@test.com, age is going to be 24, location is a nested one. We're just going to do 1 point this. I'm just putting some random values over here. -6 dot good. So this is our user object, and it's going to set it like this. Otherwise, we're just going to say user equals nil. All right. So this is very straightforward. We're just creating a very simple mock network request. All right. So what did I miss? Oh yeah. Because we're accessing it within this dispatch queue block. And actually, I have a video talking about memory leakages, I think. So it's something you're going to need to, or you want to research, just so you know how to make sure that you don't have strong references to a particular object. All right. So I'm going to leave a link to that in the card right at the top. Great. So now we have our login method implemented. So how do we use this? In our view model, our view controller rather, what we're going to do is whenever you click on the login button, because remember, the only way this is going to trigger is if the button is clicked, and the only way the button is going to be clicked is if the button is enabled. So it's safe for us to simply say network service.shared.login, and the email, we're going to pass email field.text. And I'm just going to force this because I'm sure it exists. All right. But it's always good to be safe, so don't do this. So password field.text, and we're going to force this as well. Then the completion is just going to have success. So here, if success, so if the login was successful, what we want to do is we're going to say go to the next view controller. So how do we do that? I'll just say let controller be equal to storyboard or let's actually move this to a different function. So private func go to home page. All right, so let controller be equal to storyboard.instantiate view controller with identifier, and actually have the identifier already set as home view controller. So yeah, we're just gonna copy that, paste that over here, and then we're gonna say present, and we're going to be presenting the controller. We're going to animate this, and the completion is of course going to be nil. So now let's go ahead and try this. So here I'm just going to say go to home page, else for now we're just going to use a simple print statement to keep things simple. Oh shoot. So invalid credentials. Good. So let's go ahead and run this, and let's see what we currently have. Before I go ahead and explain this, so yeah, this has to be self. Great. So it's not enabled, so we click, nothing happens. I write some wrong email and password. I click login. We should see after 2 seconds. Remember, 2 seconds delay, even though we don't have a loader over here. So I click on it again. I've clicked 1, 2. And we get like that, so 2 seconds. So now let's go ahead and put the correct value. So test@test.com, and the password is password. Login, and after 2 seconds, voila. Great. So what we're going to do next is when we open up this page, what we want to do is we want the controller to access our model and get us the name of the basically the full name of the user that is logged in. All right, so when we get that name, we want to display that in this welcome label. So how do we do that? First of all, we're going to go back to our network service to simulate a get request. So we're going to say func get logged in user, and this is basically going to return a user because we're simulating that we're getting this from the device, not from a network request, because this user is currently logged in. So what we're going to simply do here is return user, because user is the user that was created over here. Okay, so this is going to get that user, and now we can go to our home. Did I miss something? Okay, so this is optional, so I'm just going to add optional like this, or yeah, let's just add optional like this. You could actually just force it because I'm sure that the user is there, so I could do this. All right, so whichever one suits you. So we're gonna go over to the home view controller, and we're gonna go over the flow again for the MVC architecture, or can you already think of how the flow works? So basically what is gonna happen is the view is loaded, right? The view, now the view did load is where we're gonna fetch our user data. So the controller is going to say, okay, I need to get the user data, and I'm going to get this from the model, right? So it's going to use the network service to access our model and retrieve the logged in user. And when it has that, the controller again is going to update our UI and basically just set the first and last name. All right. So how do we do that? Very simple. Right now, if you did load, we're going to say network service dot shared dot get logged in user, and this is going to return a user object. So you can come over here and just say user to be user like this. We're sure it's going to exist. So here we're going to say user equals this. All right. So this is going to pass in the user. So now you can of course create a private function over here and say populate user name or welcome user or something like that. So welcome user. And basically what this function is going to do is say welcome label dot text should be equal to hello, and we're going to pass in the user dot first name, and here we're going to say user dot last name. Awesome. So here after getting the user, we're just going to say welcome user. Wonderful. So now we're going to run this application, and what we expect is when we enter the valid credentials by saying test@test.com and password. When we log in, we should see hello and Emmanuel Okwara. And that's just the way MVC works. This, like I said before, it's something that you've definitely worked with. And if you haven't actually developed any kind of applications in the past, I have a video series actually where we created a food ordering application using the MVC. And basically this is how things worked. So it's very straightforward. Just to go over it one more time, we have our model, which basically represents our data. So yeah, then we have our view, which is basically what we can see on the screen. And we have the controller, which basically connects both of them. It performs the logic for the view, so updates the view as it should. And if it needs to get data or update data in the model, it just does that by itself. So the controller is like the middleman that's just arranging everything, right? Now, MVC is very good. It's very fast, and it's best for like simple projects that don't have like a lot of things happening, all right? But as your project becomes larger, then MVC is going to become sort of messy, right? It could become so large. You're going to be having like, you'll be doing a lot of things in your view controller. Like if you see over here, we're doing our network call in our view controller. Our view controller is directly accessing our like our model and has access to everything in our model. So all of these things can become quite messy and a little bit difficult for us to manage our code base. So there's a solution for that. There's another design pattern that basically makes things a little more smooth, and that's the MVVM design pattern. And we're going to be covering that in our next video. So if this is something you're interested in learning, then subscribe, turn on the post notification, and you're going to be aware immediately I release the next video. So if you have confusions or questions about the MVC, feel free to leave it in the comment section. I'll definitely respond. And until then, have an amazing rest of your day. Bye-bye.